ancient town remain in the modern settlement of the same name, situated about 16 kilometers 10 mi from the mouth of the Cydnus River, which empties into the eastern Mediterranean about 130 kilometers 80 mi of the eastern tip of Cyprus. No one knows when Tarsus was first settled or by whom, for it is a city of great antiquity. First mentioned in secular history as being captured by the Assyrians, it was never a strongly fortified city. Tarsus was thereafter in servitude and paid tribute much of the time to the successive powers of Assyria, Persia, Greece, then to the Seleucid kings, and finally to Rome. Tarsus was situated in a fertile coastal area where flax was raised, and this, in turn, supported flourishing industries such as the weaving of linens and the making of tents. Fabrics woven of goat's hair and o textoi acute muritra longo, take 1068-30. 11. 25, 26, and no doubt he passed through there on some of his missionary journeys. Act 15. 23, 41. 18. 22, 23. Take Partak. A deity worshipped by the Avites, whom the king of Assyria settled in the territory of Samaria after he took the Israelites of the 10-tribe kingdom into exile. 2 Kai 17. 31. According to the Babylonian Talmud, Partak had the form of an ass. Sanhedrin 63b. Based on the conclusion that the name Partak may be comparable to the Pahlavi Persian word Tarthak, intense darkness, hero of darkness, it has been suggested that Partak may have been a demon of the lower regions. Aside from the brief reference to Partak in the scriptures, however, nothing can be stated with any certainty concerning the nature of this deity. Tartan. Assyrian writings indicate that the title Tartan applied to an officer of high rank, probably second only to the king. Concerning the order of the titles in Assyrian eponym lists, James B. Pritchard, editor of Ancient Near Eastern Texts 1974, p. 274, comments. Later on, the position of the official within the hierarchy was decisive for the sequence, the highest official Artanu following the king immediately, while important palace officers and the governors of the foremost provinces took their turn in well-established order. See chronology eponym Lemu lists. An inscription by Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, now in the British Museum, reads, in part, I became very angry on account of these happenings, my soul was aflame. I called the Tartan official, the governors, and also their assistants, and gave immediately the order. Ancient Near Eastern Texts, p. 296. King Sennacherib sent the Tartan along with other officials, including the Rabshakeh, the king's chief cupbearer who acted as spokesman, to deliver an ultimatum of capitulation to Jerusalem. The Tartan is listed first, possibly because his was the superior position. 2 Kai 18. 17, 28-35. A Tartan was sent by King Sargon II of Assyria to besiege the city of Ashdod, in the days of Isaiah the prophet. Issa 20. 1. Tartarus Tartar Middle Rus. A prison-like, a base condition into which God cast disobedient angels in Noah's day. This word is found but once in the inspired scriptures, at 2 Peter 2. 4. The apostle writes, God did not hold back from punishing the angels that sinned, but, by throwing them into a Tartarus, delivered them to pits of dense darkness to be reserved for judgment. The expression throwing them into Tartarus is from the Greek verb tarmiddle.taro and so includes within itself the word Tartarus. A parallel text is found at Jude 6. And the angels that did not keep their original position but forsook their own proper dwelling place he is reserved with eternal bonds under dense darkness for the judgment of the great day. Showing when it was that these angels forsook their own proper dwelling place, Peter speaks of the spirits in prison, who had once been disobedient when the patience of God was waiting in Noah's days, while the ark was being constructed. 1 P 3. 19, 20. This directly links the matter to the account at Genesis 6. 1-4 concerning the sons of the true God who abandoned their heavenly abode to cohabit with women in pre-flood times and produced children by them, such offspring being designated as Nephilim. See Nephilim. Sons of God. From these texts it is evident that Tartarus is a condition rather than a particular location, inasmuch as Peter, on the one hand, speaks of these disobedient spirits as being in pits of dense darkness, while Paul speaks of them as being in heavenly places from which they exercise a rule of darkness as wicked spirit forces. 2 Pe 2. 4. F6. 10-12 The dense darkness similarly is not literally a lack of light but results from their being cut off from illumination by God as renegades and outcasts from his family, with only a dark outlook as to their eternal destiny. Tartarus is, O textoi acute muritra longo. Taxation 1069 is below heaven. In it were imprisoned the lesser gods, Cronus and the other Titan spirits. As we have seen, the Tartarus of the Bible is not a place but a condition and, therefore, is not the same as this Tartarus of Greek mythology. However, it is worth noting that the mythological Tartarus was presented not as a place for humans, but as a place for superhuman creatures. So, in that regard there is a similarity, since the scriptural Tartarus is clearly not for the detention of human souls. Compare Mount 11:23 but is only for wicked superhuman spirits who are rebels against God. The condition of utter debasement represented by Tartarus is a precursor of the abyssing that Satan and his demons are to experience prior to the start of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. This, in turn, is to be followed after the end of the 1,000 years by their utter destruction in the second death. Mount 25. 41. Re 20. 1-3, 7-10, 14. Tatanay. The governor of the Persian province beyond the river during the reign of Darius his spies. When the Jews again started to rebuild the temple in Darius' second year 520 BCE, Tatanay and his colleagues came to Jerusalem to conduct an inquiry. The Jews appealed to Cyrus' original decree. So Tatanay wrote to Darius asking if such a decree had been issued, as the Jews contended. The answer received confirmed Cyrus' decree and the validity of the temple work, and it warned Tatanay not to interfere but to render material assistance to the Jews. This, Tatanay proceeded to do. As for 24. 6. 13. To 2. A permanent mark or design on the skin made by cutting the skin to produce scars or by inserting coloring matter under the skin. The Israelites were forbidden to engage in this practice, one that was common among some other ancient peoples. 19. 28 For example, there were times when the Egyptians tattooed the names or symbols of their deities on their breast or arms. By complying with Jehovah's law not to disfigure their bodies, the Israelites would have stood out as different from other nations. 14. 1, 2 The prohibition would also have impressed upon them a proper respect for the human body as God's creation, to be used in honoring him. PS 100. 3. 139. 13-16. Row 12. 1. Tor. The 22nd and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The name of the letter literally means mark. Compare as 9. 4. FTN. In the Hebrew, it is the initial letter in each of the 8 verses of Psalm 119. 169-176. Taxation. An assessment of money, of goods, or of labor imposed by an authority on persons or property. Forms of taxation have long been employed to support the services of government, public officials, and also priests. The taxes that were imposed anciently included a tithe, tribute, toll, head or poll tax, and tax on consumer items, exports, imports, and goods taken through a country by merchants. Taxes for maintaining Jehovah's sanctuary. The service of the sanctuary was maintained through taxation. Obligatory tithing provided a major source of maintenance for the Aaronic priests and Levites, and on at least one occasion, they received a share of the war booty in accordance with the tax stipulated by Jehovah. New 18. 26-29. 31. 26-47. See tithe. Jehovah also instructed Moses that after he took a census, each person registered was to give a half shekel $1. 10 as Jehovah's contribution, it serving in behalf of the tent of meeting. X 30. 12-16 It appears that it became customary for the Jews to give a fixed amount every year, even though a census was not taken annually. Jehosh, for example, called for the sacred tax ordered by Moses. 2ch 24. 6, 9 The Jews of Nehemiah's time obligated themselves to pay a third of a shekel c. 75 cents yearly for the service of the temple. NE 10. 32. In the time of Jesus' earthly ministry, the Jews paid 2 drachmas to the temple. When asked whether Jesus complied with this taxation, O textui acute miritra longo, tax collector 1070 of taxation. For instance, when Pharaoh Necho made Jehoiakim his vassal and imposed a heavy fine or tribute on Judah, Jehoiakim raised the necessary funds by having his subjects pay a certain sum according to each one's individual tax rate. 2 Kai 23. 31-35. During the Persian period, the Jews with the exception of the priests and others serving at the sanctuary, who were exempted by Artaxerxes Longimanus had to pay tax Aramaic, mid-middle-dar or mean-middle-dar, tribute below, and toll halak. As for 13, 20. 7. 24 mid-middle-dar is thought to designate personal tax on individuals. Below, a tax on consumer items, excise. And halak, toll paid by travelers at road stations or over fords. The mid-middle-dar translated tribute in as KJ, NW at NE 5. 4 must have been quite high, for many of the Jews had to borrow money to pay it. Besides having to care for the taxes levied by the Persians, the Jews normally also had to pay for the support of the governor. NE 5. 14, 15. In the 1st century CE the Jews very much resented the payment of taxes, not only on account of the corruption prevalent among tax collectors, but also because this forced them to acknowledge their subjection to Rome. See tax collector. However, both Jesus Christ and the Apostle Paul showed that it was proper to pay taxes to Caesar, or the superior authorities. Mount 22. 17-21. Row 13. 1, 7. See Caesar God and Caesar. Among the various kinds of taxes mentioned in the Christian Greek scriptures is telos an indirect tax, duty, or tribute. Mount 17. 25. Row 13. 7. Also refer to arkenesos a head or poll tax. Mount 17. 25. 22. 17, 19. Mr. 12. 14 and phoros a broader term thought to designate a tax levied upon houses, lands, and persons. Lu 20. 22. 23. 2. Tax collector. In the Roman Empire, poll and land taxes were collected by imperial officers as part of their official function. But the authority to collect taxes on exports, imports, and goods taken through a country by merchants was purchased at public auction. Thus the right to collect such taxes went to the highest bidders. When they collected taxes, they made a profit from tax receipts that exceeded the amount of their bid. These men, known as publicans, farmed out to subcontractors the right to collect taxes in certain portions of their territory. The subcontractors, in turn, were in charge of other men who personally collected the taxes. Zacchaeus, for example, appears to have been the chief over the tax collectors in and around Jericho. Luke 19. 1, 2 and Matthew, whom Jesus called to be an apostle, was one who did the actual work of collecting taxes, apparently having his tax office in or near Capernaum. Mount 10. 3. Mr. 2. 1, 14. Thus, in Palestine many Jewish tax collectors were active. They were held in low esteem by their fellow countrymen, since they often exacted more than the tax rate. Mount 5. 46. Lu 3. 12, 13. 19. 7, 8. The other Jews generally avoided voluntary association with tax collectors and classified them with persons known to be sinners, including harlots. Mount 9. 11. 11. 19. 21. 32. Mr. 2. 15. Lu 5. 30. 7. 34. They also resented tax collectors because of their being in the service of a foreign power, Rome, and in close contact with unclean Gentiles. Hence, to treat a brother who proves to be an unrepentant wrongdoer like a tax collector meant having no voluntary association with him. Mount 18. 15-17. Christ Jesus did not condone the corruption prevalent among tax collectors. Though criticized for doing so, he was willing to help spiritually those who manifested a desire to hear him. Mount 9. 9-13. Luke 15. 1-7. In one of his illustrations, Jesus showed that the tax collector who humbly recognized himself as a sinner and repented was more righteous than the Pharisee who proudly viewed himself as righteous. Luke 18. 9-14. And humble, repentant tax collectors like Matthew and Zacchaeus came in line for membership in the O Textoi Acute Miritra Longo, teacher, teaching 1071 vits, especially the priests, and otherwise men served as teachers. Compare 2 ch 35. 3. J 18. 18. See education. Prophets. The prophets taught the people about Jehovah's attributes and purposes, exposed the wrongdoing of the Israelites, and outlined the right course for them to take. Often prophets imparted their teaching orally, later committing it to writing. Compare 1 Saw 12. 23-25. Issa 7. 3, 4. 22. 15, 16. J 2. 2. Their teaching methods included the use of questions J 18. 13, 14. And 3. 3-8. Hag 2. 11-14, illustrations 2 Saw 12. 1-7. Issa 10. 15. J 18. 3-10, riddles S 17. 2, and symbolic acts 1k 11. 30-32. J 13. 4-11. 19. 1-12. 27. 2. 28. 10-14. As 4. 1. 5. 4. Priests and Levites. It was the responsibility of the priests and Levites to teach God's law to the nation of Israel. La 10. 11. 14. 57. 2 ch 15. 3. 35. 3. That was accomplished in various ways. Every Sabbath year, during the festival of booths, the entire law was read to all the people. Men, women, children, and alien residents. The 31. 9-13. At times, by getting responses from the people, the Levites would impress the divine laws upon the listeners. Compare to 27. 14-26. Besides reading the law, the priests and Levites doubtless explained its significance. Compare NE 8. 8. And the judicial decisions rendered by them taught principles of divine justice. To 17. 8-13. 1 ch 26. 29. 2 ch 19. 8-11. Scribes. In the time of Jesus' earthly ministry, the scribes were prominent as teachers of the law. But they did not come to grips with the real problems and needs of the people. Like the Pharisees, the scribes placed greater emphasis on technical regulations and traditions than on mercy, justice, and faithfulness. They made the law burdensome to the people. Mount 23. 2-4, 23, 24. Lu 11. 45, 46. Their teaching was not as effective as it could have been, for they assumed a superior attitude toward the common people and did not prove themselves to be examples worthy of imitation. Compare Mount 23. 3, 6, 7. Joe 7. 48, 49. See Scribe. What made the teaching done by Jesus outstandingly effective? Although the religious leaders of Judaism evidently were not sincere in addressing him as teacher Gr. Los, Jesus Christ was recognized as such by both believers and unbelievers. Mount 8. 19. 9. 11. 12. 38. 19. 16. 22. 16, 24, 36. Joe 3. 2 officers sent to arrest him were so impressed with his teaching that they returned empty-handed, saying, "Never has another man spoken like this." Joe 7:46. Jesus taught as a person having authority, and not as the scribes. Mount 7:29. The source of his teaching was God. Joe 7:16. 8:28. And Jesus conveyed information with simplicity, irrefutable logic, thought-provoking questions, striking figures of speech, and meaningful illustrations drawn from things familiar to his listeners. Mount 6:25-30. 7:3-5, 24-27. See illustrations. Jesus also used object lessons, on one occasion washing the feet of his disciples in order to teach them that they should serve one another. Joe 13:2-16. Jesus' knowledge was enhanced by his having had an intimate relationship with his Father and God before coming to the earth. Therefore he knew God as no other man did, and this enabled him to provide authoritative teaching concerning his Father. As Jesus himself said, "No one fully knows the Son but the Father, neither does anyone fully know the Father but the Son and anyone to whom the Son is willing to reveal him." Mount 11:27. Joe 1:18. Jesus was also thoroughly acquainted with God's written word. When asked which commandment was the greatest in the law, without hesitation he summed up the entire law in 2 commandments, quoting from Deuteronomy 6. O texto e acute longo, teacher. Teaching 1072. Discernment was enhanced by miraculous knowledge of the background and reasoning of others. Mount 12:25. Lu 6:8. Joe 1:48. 4:18. 6:61, 64. 13:11. He himself knew what was in man. Joe 2:25. His heart went out to the people to such an extent that he sacrificed needed rest to teach them. On one occasion Jesus and his disciples took a boat and headed for an isolated spot to rest up a bit. But people saw them going, and many got to know it, and from all the cities they ran there together on foot and got ahead of them. Well, on getting out, he saw a great crowd, but he was moved with pity for them, because they were as sheep without a shepherd. And he started to teach them many things. Mr. 6:31-34. Jesus treated his listeners with understanding. When his disciples did not get the point of an illustration, he patiently explained it to them. Mount 13:10-23. Aware of their limitations, he did not give them too much information. Joe 16:4-12. When needed, Jesus repeated practically identical information. Mr. 9:35-10:43-44. In answering questions, Jesus often fortified his reply by means of illustrations or object lessons, thereby leaving a deep impression on the minds of the listeners and stirring up their thinking faculties. Mount 18:1-5, 21-35. Lu 10:29-37. God's Spirit teaches. During the 3.5 years of his earthly ministry, Jesus trained his apostles to continue the work he had started. As imperfect humans, they could not possibly remember every detail of his teaching. But Jesus promised them the Helper, the Holy Spirit, which the Father will send in my name, that one will teach you all things and bring back to your minds all the things I told you. Joe 14.